This tutorial will identify and explore some of the key new features in Adobe Premiere Pro CS5 and the Adobe Media Encoder. First, you should know that CS5 has a number of 64-bit applications, of which Premiere Pro is one. That means in order to run CS5, you're going to be needing to work in a 64-bit operating system like you see here. This is the Windows 7 64-bit operating system here. Now, the other thing you're going to need to know is you'll need a lot of RAM. This system, which is a new HP Z400, has 12 gigabytes of RAM. Inside of Premiere Pro itself, you can allocate the amount of RAM, and I'm going to go off screen for a second. You can allocate the amount of RAM that gets used by the CS5 applications and other applications. So if you're running another application not in the suite that needs a lot of memory, you just dial this up, and this allocates less memory to the CS5 applications that are running at the time. I will say that in some of the tests that I did, Adobe Media Encoder and Premiere Pro grabbed up to, and this was on a different system, this was on a 24 gigabyte system, it used up to 13 gigabytes to render. So I would recommend getting at least 16 gigabytes in any system that you use for CS5, and probably go up to 24 if you're going to be using HD formats. So let's zip this back down, not running anything else that I really care about. So I've got 3 gigabytes for other applications, including the operating system, and 9 that I'll use for Adobe Premiere Pro and the Adobe Media Encoder. Let me click OK to close this. So it's a 64-bit application. The second component that helps performance in CS5 is the fact that it's hardware accelerated. So here in the project settings, you'll see a new setting for video rendering and playback, and you have two options. One is Mercury Playback Engine GPU acceleration, and one is Mercury Playback Engine software only. Now let me go into this Mercury Playback Engine. Mercury Playback Engine encompasses several components. One is the 64-bit nature that we just discussed. The other relates to more efficient multi-threading performance. So basically it works better with multi-core computers like this one. In addition, if you use a compatible NVIDIA graphics card, you also have the ability to accelerate some of the effects and some of the rendering, scaling, deinterlacing, and other production parameters that are applied to your clips between the transfer from Adobe Premiere Pro to Adobe Media Encoder. So if we didn't have an NVIDIA card in this computer, this would be grayed out. We'd only be limited to software. So let's start in software and let's see what a difference the hardware GPU acceleration can make. And when I say GPU acceleration, GPU is graphics processing unit. You'll also hear this referred to as CUDA, C-U-D-A acceleration, because that's the name of the technology that NVIDIA has in the supported graphics cards. Let me click OK, and we go to software only. Now this is an actual concert clip that I shot using an AVC HD camcorder. And over here you'll notice that you see 3 new icons, and if you used After Effects you've seen some of these icons before, but these are new to Premiere Pro. This means that the effect is hardware accelerated. Now the GPU only works with effects that are hardware accelerated. So if I added this effect to the project, it would not be accelerated by the GPU. However, I use the fast color correction filter a lot, and it is in fact included in this project, but it's currently disabled. What I want to do now is test the impact of hardware GPU acceleration on the CPU used during playback of this project in preview mode. So we're going to start with fast color correction disabled and this title disabled. And we're going to start as we saw in software only. And I'm going to use a special debug mode that I could tell you how to access, but then I'd have to shoot you. Old joke. What this will do is present playback statistics over the preview window here. So we've got, again, fast color correction is disabled, the title is not appearing, and I'm going to preview the clip. Now I apologize for the presentation, but you can see down here CPU load is around, I guess, 13 to 18. Okay? And now let's enable the fast color correction. We see the line above the timeline goes from yellow to red. That tells us this should not play in real time. And let's see what happens. Click preview again, and we go from around 14 CPU to 28 to 38 are the numbers I'm seeing. Now if we add the title, we see Miss Laura Lane. If we add the title and then click preview, we see that the CPU load to play this back goes anywhere from, a low of in the 20s to the high of in the 40s. Okay, so that's with software only rendering with the Mercury engine. Now let's go back into our project settings and set the Mercury playback engine to hardware accelerated. Let me delete the preview so we're starting fresh, and I'm going to leave fast color correction enabled because that's a GPU accelerated effect, and I'm going to leave the title enabled because that's a GPU accelerated effect as well. And then you can see the number a lot easier here, and let me just click the play button. And we see that after settling down a bit, the CPU load to play back this preview is around 14 to 15%. So we go from around 40% software only to 14% with the CPU. What does that translate to? That translates to a lot more editing efficiency. There's no preview time. You don't have to render to preview when you've got the hardware acceleration. And the other area where it really helps you is when you export to Adobe Media Encoder. And this is kind of a subtle point, but let me try and make it clearly anyway. So, what happens between Premiere Pro and Adobe Media Encoder is that, I am exporting this to, it's originally 1920 by 1080 footage. I am exporting this to 640 by 360. So, a couple things have to happen. Number one, Premiere Pro has to apply the title. Number two, it's got to apply the color correction effect. Then number three, it's got to scale the video from 1920 by 1080 down to 640 by 360. What's really cool about the GPU acceleration is that not only does it operate when you're previewing in Adobe Premiere Pro, it also operates when you're exporting. It's a 53-minute clip. When I exported it to H.264 in these same parameters, it took around 3.5 hours to render in CS4. On the same system, the rendering time dropped down to 15 minutes. One other factor in CS5 that's completely new is a new H.264 codec that's much more efficiently multi-threaded and much higher performance. And now with CS5, you're going to see an incredible jump in performance. And let me just click this export. I can export directly, or I can go to Adobe Media Encoder. And then if I go to Adobe Media Encoder, there's one other new feature that kind of pops out, and that's this preview window down here. So this is a 53-minute clip. We're encoding to H.264, and we're encoding at 2x real time. And that's much, much, much faster than anything you could have seen in CS4. So long story short, the features I wanted to point out were 64-bit operation, the hardware GPU acceleration, and also the one I kind of mentioned at the end, the new H.264 codec. You're going to see the most benefit if you're working in ABC HD or any of the original H.264 based formats like the 7D or the 5D. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching.